last week we jumped ahead. We've been working through the Sermon on the Mount, which is, as I've said, when you're trying to title things, we just called this one the Sermon on the Mount. I was going to call it the greatest sermon ever, but you'd have much higher expectations than what I could deliver. People call this Jesus' greatest sermon. I love the Sermon on the Mount, right? It's good stuff, but it's really hard sometimes to actually live out. Because it's challenging, and a lot of times it challenges the way we want to interact with people. It challenges the way that I want to react to what people say and do. And today we're actually going to go over some of the most famous words of Jesus, often quoted but likely misunderstood. Now, and if you're following along, last week we kind of did a fast forward because we wanted to talk about that ahead of time, because it had to do with not knowing what your left hand is doing. And so it's tough because you do something like the Code Purple Project, and there's newspaper articles, there weren't a lot of TV things this year, there's all this stuff, and you kind of feel like you're tooting your own horn, but we had to kind of work through a theology of why we don't think that was what Jesus was against. And so there's lots of stuff in there. You can kind of jump back to that one if you want to deal with that. So we're moving back to chapter 5, not because we, just get out of order, but there was a purpose to it, so trust me. And so we're going to be in Matthew chapter 5, and it'll be up here on the screens. You can follow along in YouVersion. In fact, if you use YouVersion, I know it's the Bible app. You can download it. You can look for events. Our events usually show up, although sometimes free programs don't work, and so I don't know if this week's does. But if this week's event shows up, and you can click on a link in there to sign up for Convoy. If you don't stay after and talk to Bob and Marielle and want to, and so, but we're gonna start Matthew chapter 5, starting in verse 38. Jesus says, "You have heard the law that says the punishment must match the injury. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evil person. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, offer the other cheek also. If you're sued in court and your shirt is taken from you, give your coat too. If a soldier demands you carry his gear for a mile, carry it 2 miles. Give to those who ask and don't turn away from those who want to borrow." Now, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth is probably one of the most misunderstood passages in the Bible. There's a whole, in fact, I think I did a misunderstood series one time. I can't even remember anymore. But hopefully you remember some of the content though, right? And so it's one of those sayings that we often think it means like that, if someone pokes you in the eye and you lose an eye, then you get to poke them in the eye, lose an eye. So it's like someone punches you in your eye, you get to punch them back in their eye. And that's not what that law, it has a fancy term, lex talionis. It has to do with, equal retribution, because sometimes, things can escalate, right? Like someone punches you in the eye and you hit them with a bat. Now, hopefully that's not happening in here, because that would be a weird church. But, a lot of times, the way we reciprocate to someone, we tend to do them more harm than they did us, and that's a natural thing. And so, it's this idea. In the Middle East, they still have this thought. It's to limit your retribution, not to prescribe that you have to do that. It says, do not resist an evil person. Now, that's one of those things that can be misunderstood, and this is actually, I think it was Martin Luther, it was from a sermon of his, he used this example. He said, one of the most absurd instances of this crazy saint, this is someone else talking about what Luther, is this crazy saint whom Luther describes, and this is what he said, who let the lice nibble on him and refused to kill any of them on the account of this text, maintaining that he had to suffer and couldn't resist evil. If you got lice, one, you need some treatment and some stuff in there. What is it, mayonnaise? I saw The Office one time, they used mayonnaise. You don't have to let them, that's not what they're talking. But a lot of times people, because they're trying to understand, what does it mean to not resist an evil person? Does that mean I allow just people to abuse me and do all kinds of stuff? In fact, one I think it was Tolstoy read this, and he's like, we need to do away with the police and the military. Don't resist evil. I'm like, that's not what Jesus is getting to here. Police are good things. And so, the idea is, it's the resist is to oppose, set oneself against. It's about choosing to act as an enemy. Romans 12:21 says it this way: don't let evil conquer you, but conquer evil by doing good. And so Jesus is prescribing not to escalate the violence, if you will, escalate these problems that are going on. It says your right cheek. Now, has anyone ever been slapped? Okay, good. Okay, no, not good. But I think, I remember this a little bit when I was a kid, and I don't know where we got it, but it was this idea, remember like gloves? It was like this chivalrous thing, and you slap people with a glove, and it was like challenging you to, and it was supposed to be insulting. That is not a part of our culture anymore. I mean, we're never like, oh, that's it, gloves off, slap. If you are, you're kind of really weird today. But really, again, it's this idea that in an honor-shame culture, which is what, if you don't know your ancient Near East history, that area, the idea is honor and shame are very important. And if you saw, some of you remember when they pulled down the statue of Saddam Hussein during the war. Anybody remember that? It's kind of a big image. What you may not have seen afterwards is the people are taking off their shoes and slapping the head. Which I know, in our culture, we're like, what is going on there? But the idea with a shoe is it's like this dirty thing, you walk around on it, and to slap someone in the face, to slap their head is this big insult. And so what Jesus is talking about there is not that you can't ever defend yourself, but he's saying, when you're insulted, you don't have to retaliate. I remember hearing of an accident in Rehoboth. People get in car accidents all the time. Hopefully you don't today. But when you do, have you ever seen a car accident escalate into a fight? Like it was an accident. Hopefully you have insurance. That's a whole other law we need to abide by. But then people often, they allow this to escalate into all this violence and this thing. And violence naturally escalates. Insults naturally escalate. I mean, have you been on the internet? Now, here's the thing. Side sermon, and I say this every time we talk about this kind of thing. We're not talking about abuse. If you're being abused, get out. If you're being abused, don't know how to get out, call me. We'll work on that. We're not talking about abuse, but insult. We're talking about, replacing the way we naturally act towards insults with a different one. The Bible says a gentle answer turns away wrath, right? It's easy to escalate violence. It's easy to say things that are going to escalate the situation. But Jesus is saying, hey, act differently. And part of what it means to be a Christian, part of what it means to be a follower of Jesus, is we react differently to the world around us. It's natural to act one way, but we're willing to suffer sometimes and react a different way. In order to turn the other cheek, it means we have to stay where we are. We have to deal with the situation. It means that sometimes it means we'll be hurt. We'll be offended. That's going to happen. But ultimately, we're trying to be light in the world, which we've talked about here in the Sermon on the Mount. And we're trying to be the salt of the earth. And to do that, again, it means we act and react differently to life's situation. And it takes more strength to stand and not retaliate than to fight or run away. I am a natural fighter. Like when someone offends me or insults me, my first reaction is let's put them up. We'll deal with this. But it takes more strength to restrain. It takes more strength to behave and react differently. Jesus says, if your suit and coat and your shirt is taken from you, give your coat. Now, this kind of seems strange, I think, in our culture, but what he's talking about is like if your suit and coat, and they took even your shirt from you, they've kind of done financial damage. You couldn't take the coat of a poor man because it was illegal. You had to give it back to him at night, even if you took it up as sort of a pledge for debt, because it's his covering. It's what's going to keep him. It's his sleeping bag, if you will. It's like a Snuggie. And you couldn't keep it at night, which is kind of a funny image because if he took your shirt, which is basically your underwear, and then you gave him his jacket. But here's he's saying, take the highest road possible. See, we always think, it's natural, as Americans, we think, what? I have my rights. Sometimes they get trampled on. And our first thing is to think about, us and how it's affecting us. If you carry gear, now, if a soldier demands you carry his gear for a mile, carry it 2 miles. Now, This doesn't happen to many of us, right? I mean, some of us were soldiers. Did you ever stop? It does happen over there. Not so much in America. You're not walking down the street with your stuff and go, hey, dude, can you carry this up the railroad tracks and back? Maybe in the case of being overseas, if you're in that culture, that context, maybe this will apply to you more. But most of us aren't being asked to carry soldier equipment. I mean, they're not like, hey, carry this rocket launcher for me, which seems like a bad idea anyway. But probably the most kind of famous sort of example of this you might think if you've been around church is there's a guy named Simon of Cyrene. Remember, during Jesus' crucifixion, they make him carry the cross. That was their right. They could make you do something. And there was limits to it. And so they could make you carry it for a mile. And Jesus said, hey, if someone inconveniences you, make you carry something a mile, carry it too. Go above and beyond. And that almost seems like insanity. Because remember, the Romans too were the oppressors. They were it was like the Canadians came in, took over America, and were making us speaking French and all kinds of stuff, and we didn't like them, and they had bad bacon, and then they're making us carry their French-Canadian gear somewhere. We wouldn't be happy, right? We want to resist that. I know it's funny when it's French-Canadians, because they're, anyway. I lived in Maine for a while. I got some French-Canadian jokes that most of you won't get because you don't live in Maine. I've also got some jokes against all the rest of New England, but anyway, we'll tell Maine jokes later for those of you who like Maine. But the point is, you might want to help a friend. If a friend calls you, and I'm a sucker for this, but last time I said this, I immediately got asked to bring someone to the airport. But generally, if a friend calls me and says, "I want to ride to the airport, need a ride back," what do? You go do it. Even if you're a little reluctant, you don't really feel like it. Devin's if you're listening, he got, sent off by the military a little bit. But I remember he was he heard me talking about, I always give friends a ride to the airport. He asked me if I ride for the airport. I'm like, oh, great, what time? And he's like, 6. I'm like, oh, I could leave by 6. He's, no, I have to be there for a flight at 6. Okay, I love you, man. I'm going to do it for you. But it's one thing to do it for a friend. Can you picture someone who irritates you? Picture someone, we often call it extra grace required, EGRs. It's a little short. Some of you can think of somebody in your life that you need a little extra grace to deal with. It's a challenge. And if you can't think of someone right now, they might be thinking about you. But there's sometimes, there's people like that. Now, someone who's an EGR, someone who opposes you, are you going to give them a ride to the airport? Would you then agree to give them a ride to the airport and, go drop off their laundry at the same time? No, you don't want to go extra. You don't even want to do it, right? But Jesus is saying, hey, live differently. I'm not saying you have to go pick up your enemies at the airport, although if you pick them up at the airport, they might become your friend. And don't tell them you're going to pick them up, and don't pick them up. That's just wrong. It's wrong. But it says, don't turn away those who want to borrow. It's I kind of picture at lunch in high school or junior high, hey, can I borrow $1? Well, when people generally ask you, to borrow, borrow a tissue. One, I don't want it back. You can keep it. But, people say, can I borrow $1? Do they ever pay that $1 back? No, at least they didn't at my school. It was borrow $1 meant buy $1. Some of you, if you have that person who annoys you, lend them that $1, and then every time they ask you, what about that $1? And then you never see them again. But it's even if you think the person can't return, if you're in a position to help someone, maybe you help them without worrying about getting it back. And that's the kind of thing Jesus is saying. And each statement, introduces sort of a person that's by hitting in the face and insulting us, they're doing us injury and insult. By prosecuting by this law, they're doing injury and insult. By commandeering our service, by begging money from us. All these things, but maybe the context is more to it's all these things that people can slight us, that people can irritate us, and it's not hard for me to jump in and think about how this could apply today. These are common things, and that's really a lot of what faith is living and acting like Jesus. And all of these situations are opportunities where we can live the way we naturally want to live, or we can live the way Jesus prescribes. And it's not always easy, right? Because it's easy to kind of go in a different direction, do our own thing. Big principles here. Principles love. Selfless love, John Stott said this, says, that principle is love. Selfless love of a person who, when injured, refuses to satisfy himself by taking revenge, but studies instead the highest welfare of the other person and of society and determines his reactions accordingly. So, kind of fancy words to say, are we looking for what's better for that person? Are we looking for what's better for them? Are we looking to act in a way that's more, as like the word, use the word here, Jesus-y? Or do we want to act and react the way we often do? Now, I don't know if you ever tried to have a conversation with someone ever? No. Okay, none of you have ever talked to anyone. That's sad. You really should afterwards. We have coffee, we have snacks. You should get to know someone. No, but sometimes, some people are hard to talk to, but you get to talking to someone start asking someone about themselves. They'll talk about themselves, right? That's usually a way to get to people talking. And I like people, so I like to ask them about people about themselves. But we love some of us. So you get to be talking about me, and I'll start telling you my life story. It'll probably take too long, and I'll be stuck 4 hours after church, which some of you know because I'm talking to your husband. but we like us. We tend to, and the gospel means not just living out things for what's best for us, but what's best for them. And Proverbs 20:22 says, "Do not say, I'll pay you back this wrong. Wait for the Lord, and He will avenge you." See, the problem is, I want my vengeance and my vengeance now, right? If you don't, because we can try to sugarcoat that and say we don't. You ever watch a movie? I know you do, except the two Pentecostals over here. But no, you watch a movie. Don't you love it when the bad guy gets it? Yeah, that's what we want vengeance. We don't want the movie where the bad guy gets away, he gets money, lives to a ripe old age, and finally passes away. That would be a terrible movie. We want vengeance. We want revenge. We want to see justice done. Problem is, sometimes God takes longer to do that. But again, we get impatient. Verse 43 says this. Now, I almost did these 2 weeks separate, but I think you'll see the connection. And some of you, if you have the headings on your Bible, you'll see they're two different headings. Because I think that really helps me kind of, the second part, how do you actually live that out? And it says, you've heard the law says, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you, and that way you'll be acting as true children of the Father in heaven. For He gives His sunlight to both the evil and the good, and He sends rain on the just and the unjust alike. If you only love those who love you, what reward is there for that? Even tax collectors do that much. If you're only kind to your friends, how are you different from anyone else? Even pagans do that. But you are to be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. Love your neighbor, hate your enemy. Now, that's, the love your neighbor part, biblical. The hate your enemy, bad interpretation of some things. Leviticus 19:18 says, do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against a fellow Israelite, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. And then people kind of develop the theology of the opposite of that. If I have to love my neighbor, which probably means my fellow Jew, then the enemy means the Gentile, so I can hate them. Not good theology, but you can kind of see where this develops. And that's when Jesus tells the story of the Good Samaritan, which we're not going to go into in great detail today. But the guy asks him, hey, what's the greatest commandment? We boil it down to, love God, love others, and love your neighbor as yourself. And he's like, and who's my neighbor? And then Jesus tells this whole story to talk about, how you act and live neighborly. You do good, not based on categories that we come up with of who's our enemy and who's our friend, but based on, hey, who's there? That's who you love. That's like something like Convoy of Hope. Now, you could come to Convoy, you could come to Code Purple, and you will find people that irritate you that we help. But we're not going to sort it all. We help them all. Let God sort it out. Some of you see that. Anyway, it says, pray for those that persecute you. Now, some of you are praying right now for people who persecute you. You're praying, God, bring them vengeance. God, bring them justice. God, smite them. May their car be filled with cats. I don't know. Whatever strange thing you might come up. Because, we often will pray for, but we're not praying for the best for them. And that's, we talked about forgiveness. One of the ways you know you've forgiven someone, when you can pray God's best for them. Not, may they be convicted of their sin, may they pray for bad things to happen, but, can we really pray for those who persecute you? The Old Testament has this idea of doing good for people too. It says Deuteronomy 23:4, if you come upon your enemy's ox or donkey that is strayed away, take it back to its owner. If you see that donkey, the donkey of someone who hates you has collapsed under its load, do not walk by, instead stop and help. And see, that's how you were supposed to live. We help people regardless of what jerks they are. I remember I lived by somebody who, they had a snowblower, I didn't. And I was younger then, by at least a year. And so I remember I'd shovel this very large driveway we had by hand, and I wanted to do it by hand. It was exercise, It was like, I was still doing strongman and everything. It was good. It was cardio, man. I would just get out there in shorts and a t-shirt and go at it. Because you generate some heat when you're out there, But I remember this guy, he would see me, and he had a snowblower, and he never made eye contact with me, because I think he thought I was going to ask him for it, and then he got in as quickly as he could and disappeared. Now, when he had a giant thing to be moved, and I was out in the backyard doing strongman with my friends, he had no problem coming over going, hey, can you lift this giant heavy thing and get it down into my basement? I'm not going to help you, but if you could do it, that would be great. Now, I had a choice. Help or not help? What do you think I chose? No, I was a jerk. No, I'm kidding. No, I chose to help because it's the right thing to do. Doesn't matter how I was treated, I'm still treating people well. Because that's what it means sometimes with the gospel, is you live right, you act right, even when you'd rather fight. I kind of worked that poem in there. Anyway, it's hard sometimes, but it's the way we're supposed to live. It's the way we're supposed to to do things. So and so you find your neighbor's garage door open, and they've gone away for vacation for a week. It happened to a friend of mine, and no one closed his garage door. Now, fortunately, they live in a safe neighborhood; nothing was stolen. But if your neighbor who went away for a week, and even though he may irritate you, maybe you close his garage door for him or her. I don't know who annoys you. But here's the thing: haters gonna hate. We just gotta shake it off and love anyway. What? Here's the thing. Honestly, the world lives differently than this, right? This is one of those ways that we can be countercultural as people following Jesus. It's almost a virtue to flip out on people. I mean, road rage. The other day, I was leaving a certain establishment, and as I did, actually, Justin and I were there yesterday getting a slushie because we were hot after rolling a bunch of sleeping bags and getting them in storage. I'm just saying. But, we were hot, and we got a slushie as a great reward, and they're only $1 right now at Royal Farms. This sermon brought to you by Royal Farms. But we go, we get a slushie, and I was thinking, because I drove there the other day, and there was this car in a place where I couldn't see, so I kind of pulled out a little more, but didn't go out because I couldn't see enough to, be sure. And anyway, so this guy comes by, and he perceives I'm too close to his lane. I'm not even in his lane. I haven't crossed that thing. I haven't really, done it. Well, he saluted me, very loudly screaming and, waved to me with one finger to let me know that, I had offended him. And that's how a lot of the world lives, right? Even the hint of offense, even getting close to offending, even getting close to, and then there's hate. And it's almost, it's constant in road rage. We talk a lot about driving because driving is a challenge to your faith. People debate whether you can lose your salvation or not. If you can, it's in a car driving. Because there's challenges to your faith. And it's so impersonal too, because you're like, oh, that red Hyundai. Oh, that black Ford. You don't see people as people. You just, these vehicles, I think, and then when you get on the internet, now fortunately there's never any harsh talk or slander on the internet, right? Like every forum I've been on, they're just reasonable logic people who go, man, I really see your point, but I think you're like, what internet are you on? But we often We prefer to argue in online debates, and people, you like the snarky comments back, but it really doesn't solve anything. I'm not saying you can't be on the internet, but how do you use the internet Christianly? Read the Sermon on the Mount before you post every comment. Man, people are like, I'm never going on the internet again. But we're all Genesis 1:26. God said, let us make human beings our image to be like us. We're created in the image of God. And when you see other people that way, you'll look at them differently. They're not just some guy who cut you off. It's not just some person who makes stupid comments on the internet, but they're people who are created in the image of God. It says he gives sunlight to both the evil and the good, and he sends rain on the just and the unjust alike. Now, some of you right now, because I think for a lot of us, it's easy with a neighbor. If you don't dislike your neighbor now, think of one you've disliked or struggled with in the past, or maybe a coworker, boss. But I think if sometimes we need rain, right? It gets dry, your grass starts dying, it starts raining, and you're like, oh, my lawn really needed it. When that happens, go out and look at your neighbor's lawn. Bet it's getting wet too. Right, or like when the sun comes out because we need sun to grow. You ever go over to your neighbor's house and there's like a little eclipse over their house because they're evil? Yes? No, that's weird. No, but no, it's but the idea is this idea of common grace. God does good to all of us. It's in the same way, just like God gives us grace. One of the most countercultural things we can do is to choose love, not hate. Choose to do good, not bad. Choose to be generous with grace instead of stingy. The world standard is more of a reciprocity, if you will, which is a big fancy word to say, like on Twitter. When someone follows you, what are you supposed to do? Follow them back. Instagram, follow. Some of you are like, no, I ain't getting on there. I want my ratio of followers. But, it used to be this internet kind of standard thing. It's sort of this reciprocity. It's like Christmas cards for some of you who don't get the internet things. Anyone here get Christmas cards? When's the worst time you can get a Christmas card? Maybe the day after, 24th. That's a real bad one. Because now you're in a dilemma. Because we used to do Christmas cards. Now we just given up. Well, one year we did Orthodox Christmas cards because we were so late. We sent them in January. We're like, we're in California now. It's a different time zone. We moved around a lot when we were young. Y'all getting them in January. You might be. One year, I think our last ones we sent out Easter cards. We've given up on the Christmas card. It gets busy when you work at a church too. There's all kinds of stuff you got to do. So then Easter got busy. I don't know. You're getting back to school cards next year. But you hate to get a Christmas card. Just before because you're like, oh man, they're not on my Christmas card list. Then you're like, do I lie? Do I tell them, lost your address? But you can't because I preached that sermon a few weeks ago on lying, and now you're convicted. But there's this reciprocity. We want to do things, we want to do things that are in response to what other people have done, but things we need to do, how we live is not in response to what my neighbor, what my coworker, what my boss, what my friend, what that jerk down the street does. We live in response to what God has done for us. So if we've been given grace by God, we live gracefully then because of that. Not because of what people do to us, not because of the way people treat us, but because it's the way to live. It says, if you're kind only to your friend, and that's the natural thing, right? Like, I'll be honest. I'll be frank. Hopefully I'm honest with you all the time. But, we make a lot of balloon animals at festivals. That's how we met some of you guys. And, I've made a lot of balloon animals in my life. I'll tell you, when someone's being a jerk, when you have this person who comes up to you who's like a bad person, I am tempted to make one messed up giraffe for that person. You want a giraffe? How about a short necked giraffe, and a long body? There you go. That's a giraffe. But you're tempted to do that when people are rude or jerks, right? But that's not how we live. We make a good giraffe anyway, because it's the integrity of the balloon artist. And no, it's my balloon oath that I took. No, but it's living as a Christian means sometimes we're doing good even when we don't want to. Even in response to some people, it's like traffic. When someone's cut you off in traffic earlier, slowed us down, and then they want to get back in front of you later, what's the temptation? Lock bumpers with that car in front of you. It's worth an accident. That guy didn't get in. Some of you know what I mean. The rest of you are lying. At work, someone doesn't do their share of the work, constantly betrays you, sends passive-aggressive emails, didn't even read that long report they asked you to write. What do we want? Revenge. What should we do? Invite them to lunch. Maybe even pay. I heard actual groans from some of you. Here's the thing. We treat others differently because we follow Christ. It doesn't matter how they treat. It's like when your kids, fight and argue. I don't care what he did. I don't care what she did. You still react, and you're responsible for how you react. Here's the thing about following Jesus. We've talked about these before. Uno. You ever play the card game? Yes. You've never played? Never. Have you ever played Dos? No. Here's the thing. There's all these rules in Uno. If you ever play with somebody, everyone's got different rules, right? Yes. And it's frustrating. Even my daughter and I, she grew up in my house, has different rules than I. We're playing a game. I'm like, wait. Here's one. Did you know in Uno, if you have a draw four wild, you can only play that if it's the only card you can play. What? And if I drop it on Justin, Justin can challenge me, and if he's wrong, he has to draw 6. See, you didn't read the rules. But here's the thing. Uno is supposed to be played a certain way. Now, Monopoly, there's all kinds of rules, like free parking. When you land on free parking, do you get all the money? No. And when you're in jail, can you collect rent? No. Yes.
Wait, you can?
What? They're in there. But here's the thing. All of us, now, hopefully you can see the point here. All of us adopt rules for how we play Uno based on how we grew up and how our friends played. All of us adopt rules for Monopoly based on what? How our friends played, how we were talking. Most of us are not boring enough that we read that box top with all the rules, right? Some of us have a life. No, I'm kidding. Those of you who read that, that's awesome. I'm married to the kind of person who reads the rules. So, but anyway, we all play by the rules that we've kind of just sort of picked up in life. And that's how a lot of our behaviors towards our enemies are. We're not playing by God's rules. We're not playing, reading the Sermon on the Mount going, how can I treat my enemy? We naturally want to treat our enemies the way we've been taught by our families to treat enemies, by the way we've been taught by our friends, by what we've seen on the internet and what's funny. But really, we have to live by these rules because it's the best way to live. It's the way we're supposed to be. We've all sinned against God. We've all lived in opposition to what God wants for us. But God gives us grace and treats us well. Anyway, Romans 5 says this: when we were utterly helpless, Christ came at the right time and died for us sinners. Now, most people would not be willing to die for an upright person, though someone might perhaps be willing to die for a person who is especially good. But God showed his great love for us by sending Christ to die for us while we were still sinners. And so even when we were opposed to God, God was gracious to us. And he offers this chance for us to have a relationship with God. And then if we're really going to be like the Father, then we have to treat people the way he treated people. Jesus went through what he did for us, and he responded to people with grace, mercy, compassion. And we often say, here at Deepwater, forgiven people forgive people. So we're forgiven, so we forgive others. People who are loved by God love others. It's just a different way of living. It means we often have to rise above the pettiness of our culture. These extra Uno rules, these extra Monopoly rules. We don't live by what our culture says, but we live by how God says we live. It means love your enemies. Doesn't mean it's all motion and cupidity, but we act differently than we might even naturally feel inclined to do. This is the way we're supposed to live. It's just we're perfect. Now, Perfect, it doesn't mean you have to be absolutely perfect. That's a lot of pressure. We never will be. But the word that's translated perfect there has more of this idea of completeness, maturity, that as children of God, we grow up into this. Loving an enemy is easy to understand, but it's harder to live out. Now, here's the thing. When I recently, both my kids now live with me, and it's fun, because, we take gym selfies sometimes because that's just what our culture does. I don't know. But it's fun, I get to go to the gym with my kids, hang out with them. And I don't know if you could tell, I like to lift weights. And so we always take this gym selfie. And I remember the last one, people were like, oh my gosh, you cannot deny your kids. Because, I think they both look a little like me, a little like Denise, if you know them. Some of you are going, yeah, there's definitely your kid. If your daughter grew a beard, she's you, which would be weird. But here's the thing. There's a family resemblance with both of my kids, right? The son looks like me. My daughter looks like me. It's natural because it's whose kid they are, right? And it's the same with God. If we're God's kids, we should resemble him. Not physically, but in the way we live, the way we act, the way we react to other people. And here's the thing. It's one of those things you grow in. Now, longer discussion to say, there's certain things that certain body types can do more naturally. My body responds well to, I actually have an iron allergy, for those of you who don't know. It makes me swell. Come on now. Half of you get it. Anyway, when I lift weights, I can get strong. There's a genetic potential there. I've had friends who lift and just, it's not their body type, but they can outrun me. It's a reality. God builds us in diverse ways, and so I respond to that. Now, so my kids naturally probably have inherited some of that. They have potential, but you have to apply it. And it's the same thing with us spiritually. When you're the sons and daughters of God, when you're adopted as family, you have the potential to grow, but you have to do something with it. You have to apply yourself. And so you grow in perfection, just like it takes years of lifting to reach your strength potential. It takes years of disciplining yourself to follow Christ, to live it fully out. Because, maybe some people are instantly there, but most of us, it's a struggle. It takes time. We often use this analogy of two pedals that I love, because I like to bike too. Surprise you there, huh? But, with a bike, there's two pedals, right? What happens if you just push one? We did this thing when we were kids. We were like, just push one pedal, because we didn't have anything to do but play outside in the hot heat. And then we come up with all kinds of things, like games. How fast can you go pushing only one pedal? Some of you were like, that's the dumbest game. It is, but we had nothing else to do. We had like one pair of roller skates for the whole street, So you put one on, one put on the, you race. How fast can you go on one roller skate? Most of our games involve speed with one object. Anyway, don't know what that. And then we'd run with scissors and jarts. No, we had jarts. They were giant spears you chucked at your friends and tried to get in a circle. Some of you remember those. I would love to get a set of those. That's, Anyway, that's why we lost so many kids when we were young. But anyway, what was it? Two pedals. What was my point? You have to put effort into this to live this out, right? There's discipline, there's work. And now there is God, the Holy Spirit pushing you on the other. God will birth and grow these things in you. But it really, the spiritual life is both these things pushing to get you where you want to be. And so it is totally by God's grace that we're saved, we're made right with him. But then there's work we have to put into it. And even though there's work we have to put into it, it's God who will grow that stuff in you. But you have to apply yourself or you're not going anywhere. You're just going to push one pedal and kind of halfway go through life and be frustrated. But allowing both brings us to where we want to be. Here's this week, I've been neglecting my home projects. I know there's no other dudes that have a list of honey-dos that are honey never got tos. We have this bed frame, and the slat underneath. Apparently, someone gave us this a while back, and it was a cool bed because, it was really nice. And so used it, and I was like, I remember looking at it thinking, is this thing going to hold? It didn't. But it held for a couple of years first. And it was made of plywood, which maybe is a good idea for bed slats, but I'm thinking a good piece of pine is so much better. Anyway, eventually, over the years, one cracked, and then it kind of slipped a little bit, and then the whole thing eventually, the last couple of weeks we've been sleeping, we wake up, with our feet hanging off the end of the bed because it's like a sloped thing. And so anyway, after several weeks of sleeping like that, and it was like a taco too, so we'd roll to the middle and slide to the end. You're trying to get out of bed, you can't make it to the edge. It was terrible. Anyway, lived that way for quite a while before I got around doing it. But the truth is, a lot of us will live with that junk, right? It's not the best way to live, but we don't want to put the work into it. We don't seem to have the time, and so we'll live that way. But really, now that I took the time, it didn't even take that long, but I got out, I cut things up, I replaced everything, and now my bed does not sag in the middle like a taco, and I don't wake up with my feet hanging off the end. Well, I might still because I have crazy dreams. But point being, we'll all live in discomfort sometimes, but the best way is to fix it and make it the way it should be. And to live God's way is like living on a fixed bed. We sometimes want to live in that brokenness because it's easier to stay there. It's easier to not do anything. But if we put the effort in, God will build this new way of living, this better way of living. And so, ultimately, we need to live Christianly. 1 Peter 2 says this, starting in verse 20. For God called you to do good, even if it means suffering, just as Christ suffered for you. Let's just read that one again. For God called you to do good, even if it means suffering, just as Christ suffered for you. He is your example. You must follow his steps. He never sinned nor deceived anyone. He did not retaliate when he was insulted. He did not threaten revenge when he suffered. He left his case in the hands of God, who always judges fairly. See, our incivility, or the way we treat people, does it look more like what God tells us to do, or more like our culture? It's this better way to live. Our behavior doesn't make us right with God. It's purely by grace alone. But when we're following him, our behavior changes. We live differently. We need to pursue the life that God calls us lead. He first pursued us, and then we pursue this different life, this different way of living. We have to play the game. We have to play Uno. We have to play Monopoly by his rules and the way he called us to play, because it's the best way to play, even if it doesn't seem like it at the time. Living by his rules, treating people the way he asks us to treat them, is the best way. One of the greatest examples of this love lived out in modern America, you guys know I'm a big MLK fan. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King said, darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. And what he did because it was rooted in the gospel. It's the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. That kind of thought changes the world. Because, what if the people of God really lived that way? What if we really loved those who hate us? What if we really prayed for those who persecuted us? If we live that way, things look different. Now, we can still have our strong convictions. It doesn't mean you have to believe everything people believe. I have some very strong convictions about who Jesus is and all kinds of stuff. But it doesn't mean I don't have friends who believe differently. We can love people even though you have huge differences between you. It's a way to think, before we're making statements. Is this loving? Is this harmful or helpful? Is it true? Is it kind? Is it loving? Are we loving people or loving our own humor? Christians are ultimately called to love our enemies. And we're not talking like North Korea or Russia or something, but people who aren't like us. We do good to those who oppose our ideas. And if we can't love each other, we need to deal with the root of the problem. We need to deal with that relationship with God. Because if we truly know him, and we ask him, he'll give us this love for other people. And sometimes that means being friends with people that are different than you. Like, it's so common on Facebook. If you don't believe exactly the same way I do, delete me. Well, I feel like deleting you just for that. I don't know how you can read what you said. I'm also not forwarding it because, if I love Jesus, because I've never... Anyway, here's the thing. I have Facebook friends who, I had somebody call me one, well, they messaged me like, so are you friends with so-and-so? And I'm like, oh yeah, I went to high school with them. They're like, well, I thought so because I saw them on your Facebook list and was wondering why. And then they gave me this long list of why I shouldn't be friends with them. And I'm like, I don't know. I've known her for 20 years. I'm not turning around now. I felt like unfriending him. Now, do I believe a lot of things differently in that person? Yeah. But, if you're going to be salt and light, you have to be with some people who need salt and light. We can't completely retreat from the world. So here, sometimes I think, make some friends with people who don't believe like you, which would be anybody for some of you. But let's face it. Anyway. I still remember I accidentally made a friend request from somebody. It was like a Sunday morning. I get up, I'm checking my message to make sure there's nothing I need to deal with, and I was like, you phone in your pocket, you ever do that and didn't hit the screensaver thing on, and then you ever get a friend request accepted, and I was like, when did I give that person a friend request? I researched it. Apparently it was in my pocket walking around that morning. And anyway, I stayed friends with this person because they're completely unlike me. I would never would have friend requested this person, so it's fun to have a friend who's a little different. But here's the thing. I could still love them. I could still be a witness to the way to live like Christ in front of them. Ultimately, how you respond to people says a lot more about who you are than what's been done or said. In the end, I'm going to respond to people the way Jesus says respond. I'm going to pray for those who persecute me. I'm going to do good to my enemies. Because ultimately, if we're followers of Jesus, then we have to be willing to love like Jesus loved. As the worship team comes back to play, I want to remind you, we do have the convoy. We're doing our regular